नमस्कार मित्रों, गुड इवनिंग, राम राम। आज एक बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग सेशन होगा। आज है हमारे साथ प्रोफेसर एम विद्यासागर, जो कि एक डिस्टिंग्विश्ड प्रोफेसर हैं। दुनिया के जो सारे टॉप प्रोफेसर्स हैं उनमें से केवल 1 या 2% डिस्टिंग्विश्ड प्रोफेसर्स होते हैं। तो वो एक डीआरडीओ लैब के हेड रह चुके हैं, गवर्नमेंट की कई कमेटियों में बहुत सीनियर लेवल तक हैं। तो आप कह सकते हैं कि भारत के और दुनिया के सर्वश्रेष्ठ एआई साइंटिस्ट में से हैं, और आजकल वो सेमी रिटायरमेंट में है, पर वो आईआईटी हैदराबाद में भी पढ़ाते हैं आजकल। तो आज हम उनसे डिस्कशन करेंगे एआई पे। आज का डिस्कशन इंग्लिश में होगा। प्रोफेसर विद्यासागर इंग्लिश में ज्यादा कंफर्टेबल हैं, तो आज का डिस्कशन इंग्लिश में होगा। मिलते हैं प्रोमो के बाद। युद्ध, रक्षा, शेयर्स, निवेश, आइए इनकी गहराइयों में जाते हैं। गुड इवनिंग सर, वेलकम।
Namaste.
Namaste sir, how are you sir?
I'm fine, thank you.
This is better. So friends, we have Professor Vidyasagar with us today. As I said, he is a distinguished professor. Barely 1 to 2% of all the senior professors in the world are given this title of distinguished professor. So it's a very big thing. He has been the director of a very important DRDO lab, the CAIR, the Center for Artificial Intelligence and Robotics, I think. He's been on several government committees. He was the chairperson of the government's statistical committee on COVID, which had luminaries like then Lieutenant General Kanitkar, who was the Director General Armed Forces Medical Services on it. And he was the chairman of that committee. And now he is a professor at IIT Hyderabad. So Professor Vidyasagar has spent his entire career in things like control theory and associated with AI. He's one of the pioneers of that. And more importantly, he's a very, very committed Bharatiya. And I've known him for some time. I've been privileged to know him for some time. So I requested him to come today. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for asking me.
Sir, I was thinking perhaps it'd be a good idea for us to start with you telling us a little bit about your journey, how you got interested in science, especially mathematics. From there, where did you study, your journey with DRDO, and then you went abroad, you spent quite some time abroad, and then you decided to come back to Bharat. I'm sure our audience would love to hear about that, sir.
Well, my journey really started with my father, who was a professor of mathematics. Am I clearly audible, Akshay?
Yes, sir, you are. There's a little bit of an echo.
So I'm using an external mic. Do you
Okay.
want me to switch it off and switch to the internal mic?
I think that might be, I don't know, sir, but I think that might be helpful. Might stop the
Okay, no,
echo.
I will use the built-in microphone. Let me see. How is that? Is that better?
Yes, sir, that's better.
Okay, well then I'll pull off this external mic, and that every time I move it, the camera switches off. So, right. So really, my journey began with my father, who was a professor of mathematics, and we were living in Tirupati. He was a professor at Sri Venkateswara University, and what I noticed was that there were always a lot of young people in our house, and they always seemed to be enjoying themselves. So he was my inspiration to become a professor and a researcher. So even when I was a little boy, I was very clear that I was just going to do a PhD and become a professor. So that was my journey, you can say.
Okay. And how did you get involved with the DRDO, sir?
So that is an interesting thing. I was, so my father and our family, father, mother, myself, my younger sister, we all immigrated in 1960 to the US. I was 13 and my sister was 9 at that point. And then I got my PhD and became a professor for the next 20 years.
In the US?
Well, I was mostly in Canada, the University of Concordia University and University of Waterloo. And somewhere about 1985, my wife and I decided, we had a little girl by then, so we thought we should take a decision whether to return to India or not. So my wife have studied in India till her bachelor's, then we got married, and I left at the age of 13, as I told you. So we wanted to spend a year, like a trial period, in India. And prior to that, I had spent a couple of months at the Indian Institute of Science. So I felt I understood what academic life was like. But somebody told me about Dr. Kalam, and why don't you consider spending a year with DRDL in Hyderabad? So I was in India for some other purpose, but somebody arranged for me to meet Dr. Kalam, and I explained to him what I am working in controls. So he said, "No, you can help with our missile control problem." So he arranged for me to spend a year at DRDL in Hyderabad. So that was the year 87 to 88. I was there. I was on what is called sabbatical leave from University of Waterloo. And then what happened was that maybe within 2 months of my joining, at that point, Dr. Kalam was the director of DRDL. He was not the director general of all DRDO, which he became later. So he told me that there's a new lab coming up called Center for Artificial Intelligence and Robotics, but they don't have anyone who can head it. So would I be interested in that? So my wife and I talked it over, and we decided that, well, and either we go back to India now or we just stop talking about it, because this is a very good opportunity to build a lab from the ground up. So I had 4 PhD students at Waterloo. So I requested 1 year's joining time so that they could finish off. So 88, 89, I was back in Waterloo finishing off my PhD students. And in 89, I came and joined as the director of CIR. At that point, it was what was called a project. It meant that it had a limited existence. Then I had to convert the project into what is called a PE, permanent establishment, the government lingo. So I had to go through all the paperwork and we became a permanent lab. And it was, I would say, quite ahead of its time, because in 1989, to think about artificial intelligence, even worldwide, was fairly advanced. And certainly for a country like India, it was quite revolutionary. So back then, we were just assisting in things like uh, troubleshooting in radars and things like that. So these were called rule-based expert systems. And then later, the next technology was called neural networks, which we used for image processing, handwritten character recognition, and things like that.
Okay.
So now, of course, I think we'll come to it in the end, towards the next part of the interview. Now the hottest thing is called Gen AI, generative AI, chatbot, all that kind of a thing. So, but I have been keeping up with all these technological changes. So after my uh, after Dr. Arunachalam left DRDO, Dr. Kalam became my boss. He was the Director General of DRDO. Then at the end of 1999, he actually retired from DRDO and he became what is called the Principal Scientific Advisor. So I didn't like the person who succeeded Dr. Kalam. Uh, so there were a short list of maybe 3, 4 people who were being considered to replace him, including me, incidentally, because I was already a distinguished scientist by then.
Right.
So then they chose one person for whom I didn't have any respect. So I resigned. I mean, I had my resignation letter ready but unsigned, and undated. Okay. So as soon as the news came out, I promptly dated it and signed it and faxed it to Dr. Kalam. He was pretty upset, I have to tell you. I told him, you know why I'm resigning, because your successor is not very good. And about 2, 3 months later, when we met, after he had already completely stubbed out, he told me, you were right. I have quit. because he also realized this guy wasn't any good. So anyway, I joined Tata Consultancy Services as an executive vice president. I then shifted from Bangalore to Hyderabad. And then in 1989, in 2009, I turned 62. So I was obliged to retire from TCS. So then I went to the University of Texas at Dallas because they wanted me to set up a biomedical engineering department, which I did. And then when I turned 70, I got in succession 2 fellowships. One was under the UPA, that was called the Jawaharlal Nehru Science Fellowship. I know you'll say that in 2017 there was no UPA, but I got the fellowship during the UPA time and they deferred it till I could come back. So that was called Jawaharlal Nehru Science Fellowship. That was a 3-year thing. And then right at the beginning of the COVID, I got what was called the National Science Chair. And that was a 5-year appointment. And in fact, it just ended at the end of February. So since today is March 11th, so I'm unemployed for the past 11 days. So now, jokes aside, now I'm just called a distinguished professor at IIT Hyderabad. So it's an honorary position.
Yeah.
So that's a brief synopsis.
Now,
I've been all over the place doing a bunch of things, but always keeping myself busy.
Sir, I remember just recently on Twitter, you were talking about how when you were director CAIR, there were frequent power breakdowns, and you decided to get a generator to help you with your, with the labs, the R&D efforts. Obviously, you need electricity to do whatever you're doing in robotics and this. So KSEB got upset and created a problem, sir. Just tell us a little bit about that. That's interesting. This shows the shows the audience how the Indian government really works on ground.
So the trigger for my tweet is a contemporary event. The GTRE, Gas Turbine Research Establishment, initially they didn't consume much power because the turbines they were building were much low power. So they started cranking up the power. So the KSAB refused to put in a separate substation just for GTRE. So whenever they cranked up their turbine testing, the lights would go out in the neighboring villages, neighboring houses, excuse me. So the KSEB told them you have to do all your experiments at night, not during the daytime. So that's what prompted me to recall my old experience that power outages were very, very frequent. So we got put in some UPS system where you charge the batteries when the power was on and then hope to run on them while the power was out. But that only works if the power was off for a little bit of time. But the power was out so frequently that I managed to look at a genset lying somewhere in DRDO and brought it to my lab. And so we had the watchman watching the power, and whenever the power went, they would switch on the genset. So this went on for maybe a week or two. And a bunch of guys showed up from the KSDB saying that, well, you can have your genset, but you have to pay the electricity charges on all the electricity you're generating with the genset. And I said, why? They said, and I quote, because you are depriving us of revenue. And they said, I can't be depriving you of revenue because I only turn it on when you don't have any electricity to give me. Now it didn't matter. So I was actually paying about 2.5 times the actual rate because the genset costs about 1.5 times the normal rate for power. It's not that efficient. On top of it, I was also paying for a power which I was not getting from KACB. So that's the story on that. So
hilarious. And so when you were with when you started working at DRDO, you worked on control for missiles. Was that part of the IGDMP, the Integrated Guided Missile Program, and that was what Prithvi and those which?
No, I didn't really work on the missile control at all. That was a separate thing because there were very strict sanctions against the missile program from the Americans. So they were pretty careful about segregating those parts of DRDO that took part in IGMDP and those parts that didn't. The part that I played was in the light combat aircraft.
Okay.
So when the light combat aircraft was being designed, it was actually the most unstable airplane in the world. Now, your viewers Your viewers may think that an unstable airplane sounds very bad, but actually it's not. Because the more unstable a fighter plane is, the more agile it is for making quick turns and maneuvers. The problem, of course, is that if you cannot control this thing, it will blow up in midair in less than 1 second. Okay, so there's no room for error, and the human being cannot react fast enough. So it has to be highly automated and highly reliable. Okay. So the question was, how do we build this kind of a control system? And by this time, Dr. Arunachalam had left, and Dr. Kalam was the DJ of DRDO. And so he convened a meeting to decide, can we actually design the control system for the LCA in India? Do we have the talent? And so, of course, I was one of those who said, yes, we have the talent. And more to the point, even if you talk to these so-called external consultants, they're not going to tell us anything. I mean, we have to find out our own way in this. So, so then some of you listening in may remember Professor Raddam Narasimha, late professor at the Institute of Science. So Dr. Kalam told Professor Narasimha, that is Professor Narasimha, in a month you are going to give me a binary recommendation. Either we go indigenous or we import. And of course, it was pretty obvious we will go the indigenous route. But I'll just tell you one small, shall I say, digression, which illustrates, I think, Dr. Kalam's personality. So this meeting where we were discussing whether to do all this indigenously or through a consultant from the US, he called it on a Sunday.
Okay.
So we're kind of used to Monday through Friday office hours, occasional meetings on Saturday, but Sunday was kind of new to us. And I knew him very well, so I could take some liberties with him. So I said, sir, are you starting a new culture that you're calling meeting on Sunday also? Now, I'll let you guess what was his reaction.
No idea, sir.
He said, oh, is today Sunday? That was his reaction. So he didn't know what day of the week it was because he worked 7 days a week. Right? So anyway, then we did that, and Professor Narasimha committee said we go indigenous. And then there was another late Professor I.G. Sharma from the Institute of Science. And his job was to monitor our progress. And every 3 months, there was a review meeting of the LCA, co-chaired by Dr. Kalam and the incumbent air chief, whoever it happened to be. And one of the line items was always progress on the control system. So that was one of my main contributions during my DRDO days. We did a few other unmentionable things, but anyway, this was probably the most visible public thing that we did.
Right.
But nothing to do with the missile control.
Right. You mentioned something again on Twitter about your lab did something during the Kargil war to help the IEF. I don't know, whether it's classified.
Yeah. No, it is quite open now. I mean, Dr. Kalam himself blew the cover, so to speak. So that was a kind of a funny, again, another funny incident that the Kargil war started, and we had this. Remember, this is 1999, long time ago.
Yes, sir.
The technology back then was nothing like what we have today. So I said it to Dr. Kalam that our pilots are flying blind because they have no terrain maps, nothing. So what we should have is a virtual reality flight through, so that the people are sitting in a console, manipulating the stick, and the screen in front of them should rotate as though they're really flying. See, with airplane, this was common because that's what the simulators do. So that's
So,
how the pilots get a feel for the handling qualities of the airplane. But this was different because you're trying to simulate what the pilot will see when he's going on a bombing mission. Okay. So Dr. Kalam said, "Hey, great idea, great idea." He called a bunch of us to his office on a Saturday and said, "I'm giving you 2 weeks to build this flight through." Okay. So he had a people also from ISRO because ISRO had to give us the satellite images and we had the virtual reality capability. He said, "I'm giving you 2 weeks, and in 2 weeks, I want you to have this flight through ready and show me." And he said, "Don't come back for any approvals. Whatever approvals you need, you assume it's given. So don't waste even one day saying, 'I'm waiting for you to sign some paper.' Don't do that." Okay. So we actually did that in 16 days. Couldn't do it 14 days, but we did it in 16 days. So this Saturday, next Saturday, and the Monday after that, we finished that. But you know very well, being an army man, our soldiers were so great, by then the war was over.
and
So,
what? So,
what were
sir,
you going to?
this was a simulator on ground, which would show the terrain while before the pilot was flying, so they could prep for the flying.
Exactly. See, remember, Kargil is very hilly.
Yeah,
So if you want to make a bombing run, you have to cut through all these small mountain passes and all that. So
right,
if
sir.
you're seeing them for the first time when you're doing your actual run,
Yeah,
it's very dangerous actually because
yeah,
there's not much opening there. So if you have a simulator, so the pilot says, "Oh, okay, now I have to dip this new like this." He and he might do it 10 times. Suppose he's given the mission, uh, he mentally rehearsing it 10 times, but also physically rehearsing it with the simulator.
yeah.
Not the entire flight of 30 minutes or whatever, but just the terminal phase, which is the key part. Right. So that's what our system did.
So what this also shows, sir, is that first thing on Tejas, the control laws are in fact one of the things that make Tejas very, very special.
Yes.
And they're one of the best control laws. And I think apart from one incident recently, we've not really had any crashes in the program, which is, I think, quite rare for a program of this nature. So, and then, you're saying that you had virtual reality capabilities to some extent during those times. But now, 25 years later, uh, I mean, coming back to our main topic of artificial intelligence, how do you see India's capabilities in artificial intelligence? So I'm going to ask lots of things at one side, and then,
Sure.
sir, at your own pace, please, whatever you deem fit, please answer. But I was just thinking that, in your opinion, what are India's capabilities in artificial intelligence today? Um, why has artificial intelligence sort of taken off? I mean, I guess it had to take off some time, but has it evolved the way you thought it would evolve? Is this a bit of a surprise to you? The way we've got these large language models, where even somebody like me uses it very, very regularly. So I use ChatGPT, Grok I use a lot, and I use it for various things. So is that surprising, sir, to you? What has happened is the artificial intelligence world looking similar to you as you thought it would look, or is it very different from what you had envisaged?
So before answering that question, I do want to correct one factual error you made. LCA has never crashed, not even once. Okay, that incident you are talking about, after it was inducted into service, it's got flight operation experience, the whole bit. When one rather daredevil pilot was flying there, 3 out of the 4 controllers failed. Okay,
Sorry, say that again, sir.
3 out of the 4 control surfaces failed.
Okay.
Okay, so under those kinds of circumstances, the normal procedure is you eject. The pilot ejects and the plane be damned. I mean, that's what happens. But this man was so stubborn. He said, "I am not going to be the first person to eject from an LCA." So with that highly reduced control power, he somehow brought it back.
So it did
So that's
not
the
crash.
closest he brought it back. So that is the closest the LCA has ever come to crashing. Okay. It was certainly the fighter plane in history to be inducted into operational service without crashing even once during the uh, development phase. And it's not because they had a restricted flight envelope. I mean, initially you start with a restricted flight envelope, but then you keep expanding and expanding, and then the pilots will want to push it all the way to the limits, you see. I mean, they have to fight a war, so you can't tell them, oh, no, no, you cannot go faster than this, you cannot fly higher than this. They won't accept it. So it is quite an achievement. Now, coming back to AI, a lot of the well, there are two things here. One is the fact that the large language model methodology came in the last few years. It's a bit of a surprise because I think people didn't fully grasp the potential. And second thing, of course, is that the advent of cheap computing. That's what makes the LLMs feasible. See, the amount of computation that is needed to develop a large language model would simply not have been possible even 5 years ago because the cost of computing was too high. Um, so the cost of computing coming down so drastically has made it possible to build these very effective models. Now, it has also been a bit of a mixed blessing because one thing one can ask is, do these models have to be as complex as they really are? Can we not get the same performance with simpler models? Okay. For example, ChatGPT, the 4, ChatGPT 4, had about 1.5 trillion parameters. Okay. DeepSeek 3 has 670 billion parameters, like that. Okay. So, do we really need so many? And somehow the research community is racing ahead and racing ahead. So, they're not able to take the time to answer this question. Now, why is this important to have fewer parameters? Okay. A lot of the advances, as you know, come from universities. Okay. But because of the sheer size of these models, no university can afford to have a replica of these computing facilities on their premises so that students and professors can do research on them. All they can do is to do subscriptions on these big models on the premises of the company that has developed them. Now, some of the companies like DeepSeek 3 are trying to make them a little cheaper. Facebook has come out with a series of models. You know, I think there's 4 billion models, 70 billion models, something like that. So what that has done is brought the academic research community back into the picture because you don't really need a whole lot of money to run the smallest model. You can try out all your ideas on the simpler model, and then if somebody else likes them, then they will apply them on the more complicated model. So I'm giving a slightly rambling answer because I'm trying to say that partly it was a surprise to me, but I do think that this aspect of whether the models are should really be so complex uh, is not being examined to the depth that I would like to see it examined.
So, but in terms of its impact on the world, so let's talk a little bit about that. What do you think its impact on the world is going to be, onto our day-to-day
Well,
life, how the world is going to be shaped?
first of all, it has made people even more lazy than they were earlier, if that's possible.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, so before, let's say, you may say, well, you read something and say, what, is that really true? Let me see what Wikipedia says, or something like that. Now, the Wikipedia is built right into your search engine. So, it already is filtering the answer according to what Wikipedia says. See, all these things like Grok and so on, or Perplexity, they're just filters. Okay. They're just speeding up the thing that you would have done on your own if you had a bit more time. So the problem there, and you and I have discussed this in other situations, it kind of crowds out alternate viewpoints. Okay. So, for example, yesterday and day before, there's a lot of outrage on Twitter because Saturday Night Live, which is a show in the United States, supposed to be satirical, it stopped being funny decades ago, but that's a separate issue. They had a skit in which they showed uh, supposedly Shaivites, worshippers of Shiva, engaging in cannibalism. Okay,
Okay, I didn't know that. Okay.
yeah, you just look it up. So, of course, we all know that's nonsense. But then, if you say, wait a minute, do Hindus engage in cannibalism? Something like that. So, where do you get the answer? You go to your favorite Grok or Perplexity or even good old Wikipedia. They have got this huge self referential uh, system. So, A references B, B references C, and so forth. So, before you know it, your opinion or my opinion is basically crowded out by these huge ecosystems of circular references. Now, earlier it would have taken a bit of time to permeate, but now, thanks to these AI systems, the alternate reality get put in place very, very fast. And the other thing, of course, is our Indian knowledge systems are getting stolen very fast.
Right.
I mean, I don't even remember some of these names, but pranayam is called arrhythmic cardiac breathing or something like that, and yoga nidra is called something something. So before you know it, they're all given some fancy names, and then the next thing you know, somebody is saying that we invented it, and the next to next is, well, the Hindus stole it from us. So I mean, this is the kind of trajectory on which things are going. So we have to react very quickly to safeguard our own interests, it seems to me. Now, everything is a double edged sword. Technology is a double edged sword. But if we don't compete with the world's fastest AI systems, we're just going to be left behind. Not just because we have to depend on them for getting our information, but also because we'll be unable to protect our own intellectual property. That's the danger I see.
No, absolutely, sir. I mean, it's a huge problem. As you very rightly said, people first used to go to news. Whatever is written in the newspaper is correct. Whatever you hear on the TV channel, on news is correct. Then now this guy Grok or whoever will present the argument in flawless English, no errors, and it's the written word, right? It's not bad handwriting or anything. So everything, oh, this must be correct. The thing here is what I don't, or what I wanted to actually talk about also was, I see that this to be a very, very serious danger to Hindus, right? So both to India and to Hindus. And as you gave this example that because it is a self-referencing system, the on two things. One is the facts. The facts in it might be wrong. So the cannibalism of the facts itself might be wrong. Plus, there may be some, or there probably is a lot of inherent bias because it has been probably been taught on a database which itself is intellectually biased against Hindus. For example, I was discussing certain things with Grok to get some information for a video I made a couple of days ago. I was talking about the danger of a nuclear war. Because I genuinely see that is going to happen because of this Ukraine thing. I've actually made a video of it. So he started talking about some things like Western liberal values. So I said, stop. I immediately said, stop. And I gave it a list of things to prove to him that recently, whatever is happening, especially in Europe and all these areas, there is no liberalism there. There is actually a takeover by Islam. But the point I'm trying to make, sir, is that it is extremely worrying because the facts themselves would be wrong, which is the Wikipedia part. The facts themselves are wrong. And here, because of the self-referencing things, and because it makes moral judgments, or it pretends, or it looks to us as if it's making moral judgments, what it will ascribe good to and what it will ascribe bad to can be quite disastrous for us. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, it's absolutely. It has been happening even earlier. The real danger with Grok like AI systems is that uh, they accelerate the process. But I have to say, in all honesty, uh, Grok at least tries to be a bit more unbiased compared to Wikipedia, for example. So occasionally you'll get surprisingly positive answers about, Sanatana Dharma or anything about Hinduism. You will never get it from Wikipedia. Uh, it's because there are and by the way, this is not a problem for Hindus alone or for Indians alone. Even the so-called New World Order, the World Economic Forum types who are sort of everywhere, they're putting their people in place to run different countries. Uh, the individual nations are not able to protect their own interests. Now, we have the extra handicap that we are not following the Judeo-Christian values, okay, because we're not from that theological group. But even in those countries where they don't have this handicap, simple things like trying to preserve your own culture, your own literature, these kind of things are very much in danger, I would say. So, as you said rightly, certain things are called liberal. So, if you don't agree, you're illiberal, right? So, then you get tagged. So, I don't know whether the recent US election is a bit of a pushback against that or not, because US seems to be pretty much alone in pushing back against this. I mean, you look at other countries, Canada, UK, Germany, France, they all seem to be going down the other direction. So what will happen in a few years, I have no idea. I'm
Yes,
kind
sir.
of glad I'm an old man and won't have to live to see the end of this system.
So as you know, we've had the discussion several times, and you've told me this several times over the years, and every time I've said, but unless you're getting moksha, you're coming back. so, so you,
Yes.
you you cannot eject right now.
Yeah.
Uh,
So in terms of AI, in terms of Indian government policy, uh, in general, the government of India for the last 10 years has been cutting R&D funding. So just to give a few numbers, uh, the Department of Science and Technology, their apex body for funding research was called Science and Engineering Research Council. So I was a member of this council from 1991 to 2000 for 9 years. So it's already more than 30 years ago, as you can tell. So at that time, Mr. Narasimha Rao was the prime minister, and he said, so our expenditure on R&D was about 0.88, 0.9%, something of that order. He said, no, we have to bump this up to 2%. Okay. Well, his heart was in the right place, but he could not do it because we just have too many freebies in the system. So then, after Mr. Narasimha Rao, we had the UPA government, but then we had 6 years of stable government under Mr. Vajpayee, and he also wanted to bump it up to from 0.9% to 2%. Never got it, not even, he couldn't even make it to 1%. Then the UPA came in 2004, and they also, I mean, they didn't publicly commit to increase it, but they did not also cut the funding. So just the same. So roughly from 1991, Narasimha Rao's time to 2014, the funding was about 0.9% of GDP, a little bit up and down here and there. Now, unfortunately, it's only 0.65% of GDP. So it's approximately a 30% cut over what it was in 2014. So this makes a big difference. So, for instance, it used to be that we in the universities paid only 5% tax on equipment. Now that GST has been made 18%. Now in India, people are very cheap, our salaries are low. So the biggest component of any grant is equipment. So when the GST goes from 5% to 18%, that's effectively a cut in funding. So you cut the amount of money, and you also cut the uh, money still further by hiking the tax rate. So this is all not a good situation. And in the case of I think that we don't understand the need to have capabilities of our own. Okay. Now, there is something called the India AI mission. And about a month ago, they announced that they want to fund ab initio development of AI products in India. Okay. Or something like a deep seek, let us say. But the money they're spending is very little. They said they'll spend 2,000 crores and they'll fund between 6 to 10 projects. So you can do the arithmetic. Each project will get somewhere between 200 crores to 300 crores, or somewhere of the order of 35 to 25 billion, $25 million. So for that kind of a money, we will not make a major impact. So I was trying to think, what is it we should do in AI? I feel that we should not have necessarily products, but we should have our own capabilities. Now, Mr. Nandan Nilekani made a comment that India should be the use case capital of the world. That was a very widely reported comment. So, use case capital means what? Others develop applications, we apply those things in India, and we pay them the royalty. Well, that certainly doesn't sound like an emerging power, right? That's not a good aspiration at all. But even there, if you want to build your own uh, capability, I am not convinced that trying to build something from scratch, which is what the India AI mission wants to do, is necessarily the best thing to do. Because what happens in these large language models, which you asked about earlier, they're kind of a bump in the curve. Somewhere around 20 to 50 billion parameters, it gets much harder. So, you understand? So, what we need to do is to work on very large projects where you get past the sum. Now, you can't build a 100 billion parameter model from scratch. We don't have the money. So, what I think we should do is take an existing open source model, add some capabilities to it, for example, to remove some of the biases we are talking about on Sanatana Dharma, or give it, say, Indic knowledge capabilities, Indic language capabilities, a search database, all these kinds of things. But that will help us to achieve capability of working with huge models. Because as I mentioned, the DeepSeek 3 is open source, but 670 billion parameters. So our engineers will have to pick up all the software engineering skills to cope with these big models. So if we can do that, then we'll be able to compete with anybody. That is without prejudice to the ab initio development that the India AI mission wants to do. But unfortunately, what has happened is that the India AI mission has completely ruled out any tweaking of existing open source models. They said they will not fund it. And I think that's not a good decision, in my opinion. We should have both. Have some open source models which you tweak to learn software engineering skills, and also have some ab initio development, which are called foundational models. So you understand the whole value chain. But for the kind of money that is on offer, as I mentioned, 200 to 300 crores per project, you can only do very small models. So you need a right balance. That's my opinion. Nobody will listen to me, but that's a separate issue.
So let's unpack that a little bit. So this 200 crores that is given for, let's say, one project, what exactly will it be used for?
So that is up to the people making the proposal. Okay. So the total budget is 2,000 crores approximately, a little bit less, but doesn't matter. The government has said they'll fund 6 to 10 projects. So I said, if you divide by 6, you get 300 crores. If you divide by 10, you get 200 crores. That's where the numbers come from. So there can be a number of things. So, for example, you may have a healthcare expert system that you can talk about, medical diagnosis. or something along those lines. Okay, but it will not be an end-to-end solution. Meaning, you cannot build something like a grok where you can ask it about anything. You can ask, as you said earlier, nuclear war. Somebody else can ask about Kathakali dance.
Yeah.
Somebody else can ask who are all the members of the Constituent Assembly, things like that. To build something with that much breadth, this kind of money is not going to be enough. That kind of money would be enough if you started with an existing open source model where somebody has already invested a huge amount of effort and all we did was to tweak it for the missing pieces, removing the bias, adding bits of knowledge that are important to us, adding Indic language capabilities, things like that.
Can the biases be actually removed? Because aren't the model is trained on on a bunch of data. So where the bias? So obviously the biases will be in the data itself, and in academia, or in what we call the education system, in books. So unless I don't know how it works, but I'm just thinking, unless we are 1.3 billion of us, or say a billion, if you just take Hindus. Now, if all of these Hindus went online regularly and kept speaking to Grok, just talking about Grok, and kept telling him, no, that's wrong, this is the reasons, no, that's wrong, this is the reason, will the biases that are there be changed? Because now we are a billion of us, and if we can just give it a lot of information in day-to-day interactions, could it change? Or do we need to create a new model and train it on some database? But the problem is the database itself is biased, because the education system and the politics, sorry, the media and all already have those biases. So how do we actually remove the bias?
Okay, there are two, three different questions there. So let me try to unpack them one by one. Okay. First of all, the ability to take out the bias by giving feedback to the entity depends on who created that entity. Now, you know as well as I do, for the last 10, 15, 20 years, we have been trying to debias Wikipedia and we have failed miserably because Wikipedia people are not interested in being unbiased. Now, the impression I get is that Grok has biases because it's trained on the same data, as you correctly pointed out. But Grok seems to be a lot more open to correcting itself if you say that this is wrong. So, given that intent over a period of time, Grok is liable to be, in my opinion, much more reliable than, say, other electronic Wikipedia-like entities. Okay? But the fundamental thing is the willingness of those owning that utility to genuinely be unbiased. That's point number one. Point number two is even take something like Wikipedia, which is hopelessly biased against Hindus. That part is very small. Suppose you want to look up the date of the US Civil War, you certainly go to Wikipedia, no problems there.
True.
Suppose you want to say who are all the people who signed the US Declaration of Independence in 1776, no problem there. So you don't have to throw out the whole thing. You just have to amend only the pieces that you consider to be biased. So the way you would do that in the Indian context is you can take an open source AI model that somebody has given it to you, and you have a portal where people report what they see as misleading answers or dishonest answers. And then you have to tweak the parameters so that you get the answers that you want. Now, what are the answers that we want? That has to be arrived at through a consensus from us. Okay, we cannot be at the mercy of somebody else saying, no, this is the right answer. Now, there's an interesting issue there, which I hope I can make clear to your audience. It's a little bit technical. So, there's a huge corpus on which all these models have been trained. The tweaks we want to do are a very small part of it. Okay. So, what you do is you would like to adjust the parameters so that on this small thing you get the right answer. So, what is the danger? that in the process of adjusting the right answer on your small world, you mess up the performance on this big corpus originally. You understand the question?
Right.
To put it another way, suppose you say no, Hindus are not cannibal. I mean, Shiva was not a cannibal. You fix that part. Do you also in the part mess up the answer to who was in the US Civil War? You understand? You don't want to do that, right? What you would like to do is to fix only your part, which is misleading, but not mess up the rest. Now, that is feasible provided the quantum of extra data that you are putting into the engine is a very small fraction of the overall. It's a 0.1%. See, the thing is the number of tokens, what is called tokens. So something like a chat GPT has about 90, 100 trillion tokens. So what we would be adding as Indians is will probably of the order of a few tens of billions of tokens. So if you do this right, and there are mathematical ways of proving this also, if you do this right, you can just tweak your part of the universe and make sure it gives the right answer without necessarily messing up the answers from the reliable part of Wikipedia or Grok or whatever. Now, the third thing you mentioned, suppose we fix all this. How do we force a US based academic or even a JNU academic, you don't have to go that far, to believe us and not Wikipedia? And the answer is you can't. I mean, it's a free world. So if they say, no, we don't believe Vidyasagar's software utility, I'm going to swear by Wikipedia, there's nothing we can do on that. Okay. So, but that's going to be a very, very slow process. That's where your soft power projection and all these things come into picture.
Right. Right. So that was very interesting. So what we will have to do, actually, I'll come back to what we'll have to do. I just want to unpack one more thing. Now, for now, we use. I'm just using Grok as a thing, but let's say Chat GPT only to help us compute something, to make some of our research easier. And that I use it a lot for my stock research. I use it extensively for stock research. It makes things much easier. They make a lot of mistakes also, by the way. They sometimes lie to you. Sometimes I've seen this happen. It gives you a wrong answer. You correct it, and it still sticks to the original answer. So I'll give you an example. This happened with Grok. There was a picture, a video of the Zelensky chap with the 3-4 Democrats signing some bombs in a Pennsylvania factory. So I gave this video to Grok and I said, Grok, who's in this? Grok said, this is JD Vance and the current Republican speaker. Now, I didn't know at that point in time that the second person he said was the current Republican speaker, but I recognized JD Vance. So I said, you're lying. This is not JD Vance. He's not even there. He said, yeah, I'm sorry. Then he gives a long explanation of how in context he took that and from that context, because earlier I was talking about JD Vance, whatever. But he said, now I'm perfectly sure it is not JD Vance, but it is this speaker. I didn't know who the speaker was, so I checked. It's not even the speaker. The speaker is a Republican. That chap is a Democrat. So I said, okay, let me test this guy. I said, are you sure? I said, I'm 100% sure. I said, I don't trust you. I'm 100% sure you can take it. Later on, I told him that you're wrong here also. So he got it all wrong. So it happens very often. But so what I'm trying to say is that now we only use it for interpretation. But very soon, what is going to happen is it's going to be used, its capabilities are going to be used for decision making. That is what worries me. Interpretation is one, when you get stuff out of Wikipedia, it comes into somebody's hand. And some humans make decisions on that. They get the decisions wrong, but that's okay. Here, what is going to happen is it's going to be an automatic decision. If those automatic, so let's take the concept of warfare. Because the sensor shooter ratio, just give an example. By the time you fire a missile, as the missiles become very, very fast, the interception decision has to be probably automated. Maybe even nuclear weapons will be automated. So at some stage, they will say, okay, machines will handle it better. And that machines will handle it better will come into domains where the machines end up taking good or bad decisions, moralistic judgments. That is what scares me the most, sir.
No, I think that's a very real thing because a lot of the erroneous things that you see from Grok or any chat GPT, this kind of entities, some of them are there by purpose. I mean, you can ask these questions that I don't want to repeat on your show, but these utilities will say, no, no, I'm not authorized to talk about those things, and that kind of thing.
No, please repeat.
So,
As long as you're comfortable repeating, I have no problems.
no, no, I'm not comfortable
Okay.
speaking. But anyway, so there are certain things that forbidden domains for that.
Okay.
Okay. So that being the case, they will willfully stay away from certain topics. And that probably doesn't bother us so much. But they will also willfully fail to correct certain misrepresentations. For example, take this business of sati. So William Bentinck made a big hoo-ha about how he abolished sati. Now there is this lady called Savitri Mumukshu on Twitter. She writes very beautiful, well-researched articles on various aspects of our culture. So she actually put up the proclamation of William Bentinck, the so-called Abolition of Sati Act from 1846. And Bentinck himself says the practice is neither widespread nor sanctioned by Hindus. So, if you try to get any of these things like ChatGPT or anything else, Llama, uh, Google Gemini, all of these things, to accept that it is actually not widespread, this is just a slur against us, it will almost never happen. That's the last part of my previous answer, which was getting someone to accept the correct information is a matter of projecting your soft power. This kind of a misrepresentation persists because those people don't pay any penalty for persisting with it. Okay. And Indians are, as a people, are much too soft-hearted to make others pay a penalty. Now I think we're getting a little bit less tolerant, but compared with other groups, which will not allow you to make these kinds of misrepresentation, we have been a bit of a soft target. So that's the last part of it. The technology to give the feedback to these AI systems is one thing, and getting them to actually accept the corrected answer is a separate thing. Now, the last point of what you said, will these AI systems eventually wind up taking moral decisions? I think it's almost inevitable. It was a bad thing because it seems to me that people as a group, Indians perhaps less so than other societies, but even Indians are getting there slowly. We have erased the concept of morality, in my opinion. That is, we think that there is no difference between legality and morality.
Right.
The question basically seems to be, if I do this, can I get away with it?
Right.
That's legality.
Right.
Morality is something entirely different. Should I do it or not? And the minute you erase this distinction, then I think that the first step of this slippery slope, and the society just goes down, down, down. So, trying to and see the arrogation of moral decision to automated systems is not going to be done in a big blast. It will be done slowly. Like what I think it was Yeats said, this is how the world ends, not with a bang but a whimper. Was it Yeats or somebody else? I don't
Uh,
remember. Anyway, but the line I remember very clearly. Uh, so this is how the world ends, not with a bang but a whimper. So by the time you finally realize that you have outsourced the very last remaining moral decision to an AI system, then you realize, oh, this didn't happen today or yesterday. It happened many, many years back. So, but that requires tough leadership, and all over the world, the quality of leadership is not good. I don't think that it is nostalgia that makes us think that leaders were better earlier. I just think that people were much less afraid to say what they thought. And if it cost them the next election, well, so be it. That kind of leaders don't exist today.
Yeah.
So that's going to be, I think, a persistent moral danger.
Yeah. Because what worries me is that it will be taken as a source of truth by many people, including Indians. Including Indians. I mean, I can talk about my mother, for example. Hopefully, she's not watching. But if I tell her that then this is not true, but it came on the news. So
No, no, that is very true, and I think I don't see any easy way out of it. But I can say that a necessary but not sufficient condition to combat this is to make sure that our capabilities in AI are comparable to those of other countries.
so
They
what
can't
should
be
we
superior. I'm just going to say they can't be superior because we're too poor a country and we don't spend enough money. But at least they should be comparable. So you're going to ask something?
Yes, sir. So I now want to come to this. What exactly should we do to defend ourselves? So number one, you mentioned money a few times. I mean, is money an issue? Let's say we spent $5 billion, 10 billion, 100 billion. I mean, we've got lots of money. As I've as I've spoken many times, the amount of money we spent on Triptikaran and on this minority appeasement is huge. So there's not a problem of money if we want to segregate. But let us say we had $100 billion. Do we have the people in the country who can create an equivalent or a better system, better model?
No, you don't need $100 billion, first of all. You would need somewhere between $5 to $10 billion maximum. Okay.
That's nothing.
Now, in terms of the people, just look around you. There's so many leaders in these fields who are Indians. The fundamental contribution that really revolutionized these large language models is an idea called the transformer.
Yeah. Google paper.
And the lead author on that is a guy called Vaswani, who is working for Google. Now, the standard joke everybody makes is that Vaswani is still waiting for this green card because he's stuck in this H1B visa queue. Okay, that's a separate issue altogether. Okay, you understand what I said? Vaswani is on an H1B visa. He
Okay,
has
no,
been cleared for he has
I,
been cleared for the green card, but hasn't got it yet. Okay.
we should
So
pounce on.
anyway, huh?
We should pounce on him. Get him, make him equivalent to a joint secretary or something. Give him a
No,
beautiful.
no, no. That's what we don't do. That's exactly what we don't do because the the Babudam will never relinquish control. They never relinquish it. Okay. So when I was in TCS, I was there for nearly 10 years. That was 2000 April to 2009 September. So just 9.5 years, you can say. During that period, several software companies hired IAS babus, thinking that they'll be good at the two things. They thought number one, they'll be good administrators. Number two, they'll be able to open doors in the government.
Yeah.
And they were wrong on both counts. Because the IAS people know only to stop projects, not to start projects. I mean, there are a few good people, I'm not denying that. But by and large, their core competence is to slow projects down, not to speed them up. Okay. Second point is once an IAS person resigns or retires and leaves, nobody picks up his phone calls. Okay. So the idea of saying that let's take somebody, I mean, Vaswani is, I don't want to talk about him specifically. I mean, obviously a genius, the way he wrote that paper and so on. But there are a million Indians in the H1B queue, right? Even if you take just law of large numbers, there must be 10 to 20,000 people who must be absolutely brilliant in these million people. Right? Now, what the Chinese did was they had this program called the Thousand Talent Program. Thousand Talents Program. So they brought them back. They paid them more money than they paid to a Chinese person with comparable credentials, and essentially gave them freedom from bureaucracy. And a lot of this started about 20, 25 years ago, not today. So much of the advances that you see today started because of that investment.
Right.
Now in India, it's not possible. In the government sector, every position has a scale. Nobody can deviate from the scale. You know that as well as I do.
Yeah.
It is even possible to give a contract appointment at whatever salary you feel like. So long as see, all these scales apply only to permanent position. If you have a temporary position and say Mr. X or Mrs. X is appointed for a period of 5 years, you can pay whatever you feel like. There is no restriction. But we don't use that flexibility because we don't want to in the government. Okay, now you may say, what about the private sector? Private sector to me is much more disappointing than the government. Indian private sector is sitting on hundreds of billions of dollars in cash. You know that.
Then
What are they
there's
doing with it? They're doing nothing with it. In other words, why couldn't our IT companies have said we're going to invest a quarter of 1% of our profit to do core technology development in computer science? They don't do that. Okay. So if all these people are available, in principle, somebody can say, yeah, why don't you take 100 of these people, just let them loose, even if you pay them, say, $250,000, okay, $250,000 a year, for 100 people, that's $25 million a year.
nothing.
Peanuts, probably coffee and snacks budget, right?
Nothing.
But nobody thinks along those lines, right? Even if you decide to pay them $1 million per year, that's $100 million per year. And many people would, there's a big misconception that the NRIs are very mercenaries and all that. It's not true at all. They just want a hassle free life. And they do understand that the cost of living in India is lower. So you don't have to match their US salary. You just have to come somewhere in the ballpark. But what they don't want is hassle. And that's what we are unable or unwilling to provide. In the government, we are unable to provide a hassle-free environment, and in the private sector, we are unwilling to provide a hassle-free environment.
I'm very surprised. So this is another thing that I wonder about. When the current form of AI really takes off in applications, much of the work I don't know, but so please correct me if I'm wrong. At least some of the work that TCS does and Infosys does will go up in smoke because of AI, because it can be automated.
Absolutely.
So, what is the impact going to be on these companies, and why are they not doing something about it?
No, I don't know that they're not doing anything because I'm not in these companies anymore. But I presume they're at least alive to the danger that their business model is going to be very severely disrupted. Okay. Now, what they're doing in terms of preparing, I do not know. There should be. But I think they are at great risk of their business models being totally disrupted by the advent of AI. See, if you went back even just 2 years ago, all these bots could not write accurate code. They would produce buggy code.
Right.
Suppose you ask ChatGPT 2 or ChatGPT 3, write me a program to do some reasonably simple task, multiply two matrices or something. Well, at that level, it was sort of okay. But if you want to give a more complicated application, the answer was not always reliable. But it will always get more and more reliable with the passage of time. So at some point, you have to figure out what are all these humans going to do? How will they justify their existence in the job, right? So I think the Indian IT sector is potentially going to face a lot of disruption. Whether they are really prepared for that day or not, I do not know. But one thing I do know for sure, they are not funding research in academia to create counter tools so that they can also be equipped to create their own AI tools. Whatever tools they are building, they are doing them in-house.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
You understand my
So,
point? There should be ramping up the academic outreach,
absolutely.
and they're not doing it.
The other difficult to understand why that's the case, because the other thing, and from a government perspective, then I was just thinking, one of just talking about economics, the biggest economic problem right now is jobs
Yep.
for the country. I think you'll agree with me on that.
And well, I agree with you, but somehow in the government they don't seem to want to agree with that. I mean, it's very clear that there are no jobs,
Yeah,
especially for fresh graduates. There are no jobs.
right. So, sir, and not only for graduates, even for non-graduates, because there's not
Absolutely.
much jobs in the farming sector. The government is insistent on building these so-called smart cities and moving rural to urban. So there's no jobs in urban. Rural also is not doing very well. So our fundamental problem on economics is jobs. To my mind, AI is certainly not the technology that can create jobs. Or can it, sir? Is there a way that AI can create jobs?
See, AI will certainly create jobs if you train people to create jobs. Okay. In other words, it's the AI is less disruptive, in my opinion, than the industrial revolution.
Right.
In the following sense, in that the industrial revolution of about 160, 170 years ago, it replaced manual labor by mechanical labor. So the mechanical labor requirements were far less than the manual labor requirement. In the case of AI, the office culture is not going to change fundamentally. I mean, I call this the point and click culture. What do we all do? We move the mouse, go onto my icon and click. Okay. The only thing AI does is what happens behind the screen after you click. That changes. Okay. Though fundamentally the way in which you interact with the computer is not going to change very much. So in principle, we should be training huge numbers of people to do various things. Okay. But I don't see anybody really thinking about what are the skills required by young people in the post AI era. And by the way, this is not just for us. Even in the US, they have the same problem. Uh, so AI will not create routine programming jobs, but AI will create other jobs. And what we need is some amount of brainstorming to say what are these jobs and how do we prepare people for them. Okay. So the disruption need not be uniformly spread. That is what people don't realize. So the whole world can't be unemployed because then all the businesses will collapse. Okay. But some parts of the world can be seriously unemployed. And that's what people don't take into account, it seems to me. Okay. And we keep saying, 1.4 billion consumers, people will keep coming to us. Where's going to be our purchasing power? They don't answer that question. So, in terms of educating the population, we should teach them reasoning skills, abstract thinking skills, some amount of personality development, though I think that part is a little bit exaggerated. But the idea that life is not about making reels and putting TikTok videos. There's no TikTok in India, but it there in other countries. That fundamental message that life is not about that. That message is not going out. I mean, I feel that whether it's because young people are frustrated because there are no jobs or they have too much time on their hands, I don't know. But I don't see the labor class being ready for the post AI world. That's what I feel.
So there is, pardon my saying so, sir. You will forgive me, but there is a role model problem here as well. The Pradhan role model is constantly with Raju cameraman and making reels himself. So the rest of the country also follows.
No, that is very true in the sense that Leah said Raju, the cameraman, but see, the education minister, the science and technology minister, none of them really has a clear idea of what should be the post AI Indian society. Uh, so, for example, the India AI mission does it have an advisory group cutting across all sectors, IT sector, industrial sector, academic sector, users, things like that. That's how you get feedback. Maybe there is something, but it is not doesn't seem to be there in a very prominent way, right? So taking you, I'm saying the same thing. You are in a slightly different way. The flow of information is always from the top down. Very little is going from bottom up, and probably this is by design. I don't know.
It's by design and by personality. So the last question I would like to ask you is, what are your thoughts on AGI?
See,
General
AGI,
intelligence,
yeah,
singularity
I
that
know.
is talked about.
Artificial general intelligence. Well, you see, the genesis of AGI. Everybody said that we all have only one brain. One person becomes a musician, one person plays chess, one person solves mathematics problems. So how come this is possible? So is it possible to have one computer program, one mega supercomputer program, which with just the right cues and the inputs can be taught to do all these things? Okay. Now the point is that nobody is expecting AGI to do everything simultaneously. What I mean is, you have a Gukesh who's a great chess player, but nobody is expecting him to prove theorems in mathematics. Right? You may have Manjul Bhargava, who's a top-notch mathematician, and I think he's a competent chess player, but he's not a world champion chess player. Right? So the idea is not so much that AGI is simultaneously everybody doing everything, but starting from the same core program, you can branch off in different directions and reach world-class status in any dimension with this suitable training and suitable environment. So that's the idea. People have been, I think, too quick to announce the arrival of AGI because, first of all, there should be some criterion to say what is AGI. In other words, when do you say that we have achieved true AGI? So I think that expanding the scope of artificial intelligence systems is a noble objective, and I'm all for that. I'm not very enamored of all these phrases like AGI because that sounds more like marketing rather than a technological challenge. But that's my personality, I suppose. And I don't like hype. I think we should just stick to what we do, let the work speak for itself instead of engaging in all this, the hype, right?
Yeah. No, I think what they say, when they say AGI, they basically mean Skynet, kind of thing from Terminator. That there will be one entity will be so intelligent, also have consciousness, which will have self-awareness, and then which may or may not actually attack humanity.
No, that's what I'm saying. I think that may never actually happen.
Okay.
If you remember the old movie 2001 Space Odyssey,
Yeah.
these astronauts are trying to figure out how to turn off the computer. HAL, it was called. Uh, I'm sure you know that HAL was just IBM with everything shifted by one
No,
letter. Were you aware of that?
no.
So you take IBM and you just take the previous letter in the English alphabet, you get HAL. That's why the computer was named HAL.
Okay.
So the HAL figures out, even though the astronauts are outside the spacecraft, that they're trying to shut it off by lip reading, then just closes the door of the capsule and strands the astronauts in space. And that's the last scene in 2001 A Space Odyssey. It felt like science fiction then. Maybe it's not science fiction today. But I don't, if you're asking whether we will build some system that will destroy humanity, I would say that nuclear weapons are capable of destroying humanity. As an army man, that we have enough nuclear weapons to kill the world 10 times, 20 times over, right? If all of them are launched. Even the second strike capability of a nuclear power is there more than enough to wipe out a lot of humanity. So I think that the deterrence against some system wiping out humanity still has to come from humans only. Uh, In terms of AGI, I don't really see it happening. But I think you make a very valid point that we should be aware of the possibility of it happening and never be, shall I say, complacent about that. But I think it's not very likely in my view. That's what I think. I go back to the question you raised about some time ago. Do we keep on outsourcing moral decisions to machines? That to me is a far bigger worry than AGI. Because what it means is that we no longer take ownership for our decision. We say, well, Grok told me this, Perplexity told me this, ChatGPT told me this. Why are you blaming me? That kind of attitude is not good, in my opinion.
No, I think, yes, that true, but more than that, what will happen is that decisions will be taken by them. So schools design a curriculum. LGBT is great. Okay, yes, that's a curriculum. A world may come where it's already started in some country. If you speak up against something, it'll be deemed as wrong.
Oh, yeah.
And so there are n number of areas where if you go against the consensus, and the consensus itself is wrong. Consensus is, I mean, if we look at it from a dharmic framework, consensus is extremely anti-dharmic. Even if you look at it from a pure naturalistic framework, just this is how nature functions. It's quite against nature. So I think that was what I was talking about.
No, I agree. I mean, the communists used to call it making you an unperson. I mean, you basically don't exist. But then you see Justin Trudeau simply froze the bank accounts of anybody who protested against vaccination.
Yeah.
I mean, people would have been horrified at this kind of a thing. That just because I'm in power and I disagree with you, I'm going to cut off your access to your money.
Liberal democracies, sir, according to
Yeah,
Grok.
I know.
Liberal democracies.
Yeah.
There is only one liberal democracy in this world right now, thank God, and that is America, and just because Trump has come. But there are no liberal democracies left in the world, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, the Democrats in the U.S. seem to be intent on burning the country down just because they lost the last election. I don't know. You must have been seeing that all the Tesla showrooms are being attacked, and the vehicles are being set on fire and all that. They're dancing in the streets because Tesla stock has tanked yesterday or something like that. They think this is some great news. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that Tesla was anyway extremely expensive. I'm waiting for it to half from here so that I can enter. I still think it's far too expensive, but absolutely. And it's all over the place. Europe is hell bent on triggering a nuclear war. I did a video on Ukraine and
Yeah, I've
Russia.
seen that. I've seen the video.
Sorry, sorry. It's strange that all of who was it who said it? I don't know whether Elon said it or somebody said it, that it's really strange that in 2025 the people who are anti-war or who want to calm things down a little bit are being called the radicals by the liberals.
Well, what these people don't understand is that you cannot contain a nuclear war. What I mean is, you can contain a shooting war to the immediate theater where the shooting is taking
Yeah.
place. If you are far away from it, you're relatively safe. That's not true in a nuclear war. I mean, the effects will be felt all over the world. But I also get the feeling that most of these people pushing for it, they aren't very smart. I mean,
They're extremely dumb.
very dumb. Yeah, exactly.
It's a scary combination of extreme stupidity, pardon my language, extreme stupidity, extreme ego. When we got extreme stupidity means extreme ego, is a
Yeah.
disaster. As,
No, I
as
agree.
as Warren Buffett says, he says he says he wants to have intelligent people and people with high integrity. But if he finds people with low integrity, he wants them to be stupid. No. Sorry, I got that wrong. Forget it, doesn't matter. But that's the danger. You got extremely stupid people with great egos destroying, willing to take the world to war. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Namaskar. Very, very nice having you, sir. Namaskar.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Not at all, sir.